Hello, dear students and esteemed learners. Welcome back. Welcome to my course on Sociology of Health. Now we are having our lecture for the ninth week, and the theme that we are covering are basically health of women and reproductive health. And this is the lecture number 42. And the topic that we are going to cover today is reproductive health of women. So, in the previous lecture for this week, we talked about the health of women, the emerging concerns. And there we try to understand some of the viewpoints basically and some of the counter viewpoints also. And then we try to understand the top 10 health related problems of women which are identified at a global level, right? And we also understood that very often the feminist critics say that reproductive health or the maternity experiences are not the only problem that women have to experience in their life. So there are several other issues which are equally important, and when the state is focusing a lot on these two aspects, then it basically appears that women is seen either from the perspective of population control only, or from the perspective of basically the caregiver of the children, right? So these were two important critiques that we tried to understand in the previous lecture. And then we also understood that although there are criticism, but one reality is this, that there are huge number of women who are basically dying because of the maternity experiences, which are generally identified as maternal mortality, right? And those are actually preventable. So we also talk about some of those important issues which could be addressed to make these experiences comfortable, and basically some sort of healthcare services can provide that kind of services, right? So this lecture we will try to understand reproductive health of women. Now reproductive health is something which is associated with men as well as women, but generally we talk about reproductive health in the context of women because of the maternity experiences that women have to experience. So in this lecture, I've included 3-4 important things. First, the ICPD conference 1994, that is the International Conference on Population and Development. We have tried to understand that because ICPD conference talked about reproductive health for the first time. Then the definition of reproductive health, and then reproductive health, the new approach on population and development. And then we have also talked about the 1995 fourth World Conference on Women that was held at Beijing. So in this lecture, we will try to understand what do we understand by reproductive health, right? So we will start with the International Conference on Population and Development, ICPD, which was held in 1994, Cairo, Egypt. And this conference is considered very important in terms of making certain provisions and addressing some of the issues which were raised by women amicably. So in the previous lecture, we talked about some of the points, some of the concerns, and this ICPD conference has tried to address to all those issues which were basically raised by the women or the feminist critics, right? So now this has emerged a new approach which talks about empowerment, and we will try to understand now the concept of reproductive health, right? That how this is looking at the such an important issue related to the human society. The term reproductive health was first adopted at the International Conference on Population and Development 1994 and heralded a major shift in thinking and approach to population issue. So basically this ICPD conference has made a kind of paradigm shift in the approach which was existing. So how this paradigm shift basically has taken place? Because now the issues related to reproductive health are not seen only from the perspective of population control. Now, these are seen from the perspective of women as an agency. So, that is the shift to a much wider field encompassing not only fertility control but safe sex and pregnancy free from coercion, discrimination, and violence. Right? So there are three, four important things. One is this, that okay, fine, reproductive health is something related to family planning, but it's not just that. It is much more than that. So what are those other things? One important thing is about how safe the sex experience of the women is, right? So that is very important. And then whether that pregnancy is free from coercion, discrimination, and violence or not. Because very often, because of the patriarchal nature and the kind of relationship that the women may have with men, there is a kind of coercive relationship or discriminatory relationship is also coming into existence. So, this reproductive health is talking about a situation where all these adverse situations could be minimized. The ICPD was held that we basically talked about. Then it finalized a program of action on population and development, including infant mortality, birth control, family planning, and education of women for the next 20 years. So basically, it was adopted so that it could remain relevant for next 20 years. But as of now, this is also equally relevant. It endorsed a new strategy which emphasized the numerous linkages between population and development and focused on meeting the needs of individual women and men rather than on achieving demographic targets. So, change in the shift. Now, this is focusing more on the women and men at the individual level and not just operating to achieve certain numbers which basically the states were actually looking for few decades before. That means not just as a tool of population control, but as individuals, as agencies who have their life and lived experiences. Now, key to this new approach is empowering women and providing them with more choices through expanded access to education and health services and promoting skill development and employment. That means basically empowering women and changing or trying to change the lived experiences by changing the entire environment, basically by providing employment, then giving skill, then having kind of participation in the democratic processes, and all those things which are basically required for making life meaningful. That means reproductive health is looking at the health of the women in the reproductive span, not only from the perspective of population control or fertility behavior, but from the perspective of being part of the larger development process. So, reproductive health is defined by the ICD program of action, and we need to go through so that we can have a fair understanding about what is reproductive health. A state of complete physical, mental, and social well being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity in all matters relating to the reproductive system and its functions and processes. So, basically, it talks about the health during the reproductive span or during the process of reproduction. Basically, during the process of reproduction. Now, reproductive health therefore implies that people are able to have a satisfying and safe sex life. Now, here I have highlighted the word people because it is not mentioned here that women or men. It has mentioned the word people. That means it's applicable for women as well as men, because a reproductive role basically men as well as women both have to play. That we understand because of our biological understanding. So, reproductive health therefore implies that people are able to have a satisfying and safe sex life, and that they have the capability to reproduce and the freedom to decide if, when, and how often to do so. Now, that last sentence is actually very important, that they have the freedom to decide if, when, and how often to do so. That means the person concerned should take the decision about basically reproduction. It should not be dictated by some other agency, because the women are the agencies in themselves, right? So that is the new perspective which is uh, making us, this is the new perspective which is actually helping us to understand the reproductive health. And what is very important here is this, the freedom to decide if, when, and how often to do so. Now, implicit in the last condition are the right of men and women to be informed and to have access to safe, effective, affordable, and acceptable methods of family planning of their choice, as well as other methods of birth control which are not against the law, and the right of access to appropriate healthcare services that will enable women to go safely through pregnancy and childbirth and provide couples with the best chance of having a healthy infant. So, actually, if you try to understand the whole argument, you get to know that what is it actually talking about? It is saying that there should not be an external control on the reproductive behavior of people. Now, who is that external agency? Sometimes it can be a state, because of the very strict population control measures. Sometimes it can be any other agency. We have seen that very often the belief system of people has played very important role in that. And then sometimes the patriarchy is also playing that role. So no matter which is that external agency, this understanding on reproductive health is saying that it should be the choice of the person concerned. And in the case of reproductive health of the women, it should be the choice of the women, because they are responsible for their own life and their own health. So that is why they are talking about empowerment as the new tool for having this reproductive health, right? Because unless women are empowered enough, they cannot take those decisions in their own favor. So this is the new understanding which talks about the reproductive health and all issues related with this reproductive health. ICPD has left a landmark legacy and remains an essential tool in work to improve sexual and reproductive health globally in the aftermath of arrival of HIV/AIDS and RTI and STI. Right. So, because of basically the emergence onslaught of STI and HIV/AIDS, certain regulations were basically dictated by the state. So, whatever thing is suggested, that suggestion should come as a choice, not as a compulsion, right? So this is also talking about democratization. It's also talking about the capability to take the decisions, and for that basically education and of course some kind of inclusive environment is required. The notion of reproductive health shows a holistic and healthcare approach toward the problem of population growth and says no to rigid and severe population control measures. So now we understand, I hope. You may remember or you might have read somewhere that in the 1970s, basically 76, 75, 77, that period in India, there were very harsh steps related to population control, basically. So when the state is dictating that kind of harsh step of family planning, then that actually compromises the health of the women as well as men that we experienced at that point of time, right? So reproductive health is talking about empowering people so that they can take the decisions in their own larger benefit, and then dissociating basically this issue of sexuality with the issue of population, because sexuality is not always necessarily associated with population or population control. These are two different issues. And then basically there is a new discourse about the reproductive right and the sexual rights. So women do need to have those sexual rights, along with that those reproductive rights, and that will come only when they can assert themselves as independent agencies. So what is this new approach? The reproductive health and rights approach adopted at ICPD is premised on a view that values women intrinsically and is genuinely concerned about their health and well-being, right? So women is not just an object, not just an instrument, but they are entity, and that basically needs to be accepted and understood, right? Then women's reproductive capacity was transformed from an object of population control to a matter of women's empowerment to exercise personal autonomy in relation to their sexual and reproductive health within their social, economic, and political context, right? So this is how basically this is being approached. And then women's health in general and their sexual and reproductive health in particular are determined not only by their access to health services but by their status in society and pervasive gender discrimination. So now the issue related to status, basically whether the social status or its economic status or its a political status, that is also becoming important, because the behavior of the person is getting governed by the kind of status that he or she is having in that larger context. So this approach is also focusing on empowerment so that the status of the person should improve, because once that has improved, then only the decision taking situation basically could go in her favor. So this is again a new type of understanding. Finally, we can say that the ICPD posits the human rights of women, their right to personal reproductive autonomy and to collective gender equality as a primary principle in the development of reproductive health and population programs. So this is how we have tried to understand basically the issues related to reproductive health. One thing very clear here, that this conference was primarily a conference on population and development. So the purpose was to look at the issues related to population control from the perspective of development, and in this conference basically these new discourses emerged, and that is why we see a combination of the development approach as well as an impact of the population related goals, right? This development approach is is at the center of the new type of understanding, and that is why a new saying actually came into existence, and which says that development is the best contraceptive. So if we look at the timing of this conference, then again the context helps us to understand that it was the time where when HIV/AIDS was actually creating huge problems and concerns. So on the one side, there were issues related to HIV, STI, AIDS, and on the other side, there were issues related to expanding population, increasing population, and this new approach related to reproductive health basically helps the society to address these problems at a larger level. And what is very important here, that it also talks about empowerment of women, and basically that empowerment which be very helpful and of course instrumental in bringing new kind of change and new kind of development in the society at a larger level. So after having that understanding, basically we would like to talk about the fourth World Conference on Women, which was held in 1995 there in Beijing, right? That is also very important, very important. And so we will have some discussion on this. The 1995 Fourth World Conference on Women held in Beijing marked a significant turning point for the global agenda for gender equality, right? So because it was a conference on women, it talked about gender equality and a new framework, basically a new mechanism, a new discourse, rather multiple new discourses came into existence. The Beijing Declaration and the platform for action, adopted unanimously by 189 countries, is an agenda for women's empowerment and considered the key global policy document on gender equality. It reiterated the paradigm shift of the ICPD. Now, what is visible or what is very clear now? We talked about the ICPD conference, and the ICPD conference talked about empowerment of women, because empowerment only can make the reproductive experiences uh, in favor of women. So now the question is this: the how to think of the larger goal of empowerment of women, right? Because empowerment is multidimensional, and that engages so many dimensions: the political dimensions, economic dimensions, social dimensions, of course cultural, religious, whatnot, so many things operating at the same time. And most important, that the patriarchy is prevailing, and which basically is the biggest resistance in the path of, in the trajectory of empowerment of women. So talking about empowerment in itself needs good deliberations, and that is why this conference is becoming very important, because it suggested the way forward on how to achieve this empowerment of women, right? So we'll talk about that. One of the critical areas of concern identified at the Beijing conference referred to inequalities and inadequacies in access to healthcare and related services, adopting a life cycle approach to women's health from infancy to old age. So, one important issue that was related to health was this: that there is basically inadequacy and inequalities existing. So, how this can be addressed, and for this, a life cycle approach was suggested. And this life cycle approach talks about taking into consideration the entire life of the women, right from infancy till the old age. And so when we were talking about the top 10 problems of women, we did talk about the problems at the young age, and at the same time the problems at the older age, right? So this is a new approach which talks about the entire life cycle, and of course all the experiences that women have during that life course will matter, will count. The Beijing Declaration stated that the explicit recognition and reaffirmation of the right of all women to control all aspects of their health, in particular their own fertility, is basic to their empowerment, right? So everything should be in control of women, which is related to her own life. That is the true meaning of empowerment. So how to achieve that empowerment? Keeping in mind the kind of political, economic, or socio-cultural structure or system or mechanism or discourses or narratives that the world is having. For this, new discourses need to be built up, new approach basically need to be developed, right? And this conference is basically providing new milestones in developing those new discourses or trajectories. So the 1995 Fourth World Conference on Women Beijing sets strategic objectives and actions for the advancement of women and the achievement of gender equality in 12 critical areas of concern. So basically a strategy is prepared, and then 12 critical areas of concern identified, and then it is agreed that if those 12 critical areas of concern are actually handled appropriately, then it will help in developing a more gender equality. It will help in developing gender equality, and will help in addressing the inequality, especially the gender inequalities. So what are these 12 critical areas of concern? We will very briefly try to understand, but I have given the list of all these areas, right? And I hope you will understand these also, but very briefly we'll talk about, so that you can get the understanding in case you are not familiar with this. Now, one, women and poverty. See, poverty is actually creating several limitations, and it is the biggest hurdle in emancipation and empowerment, right? So if women are subjugated to poverty, then any effort or any even thought of empowerment will not become possible. So, this financial autonomy or this financial empowerment is very important for realizing any other kind of empowerment. And unfortunately, a large population in the developing world is witnessing or living under the experiences of poverty. So, the issues related to poverty need to be addressed, because if poverty is creating economic inequality, then the categories which are already subjugated or oppressed, they will get further oppressed. And of course, poverty will always create more oppression and subjugation for women. So that needs to be addressed. Then education and training of women. Education is capability enhancer. It enhances, it is an enabler. So when we talk about capacity building, then definitely in the modern society, education is playing very important role. And so access to education should be there, and not only education, but along with that some kind of specific training should also be there, because education is catering to the larger goals or the values, but a specific training can help you to get it converted to a specific purpose, right? So a combination of both the things are very important for addressing especially the financial goals, right? So education and training of women are very important, and these can help in creating gender equality if undertaken from women's perspective. Then women and health. Yes, we have been talking about women and health in the previous lecture, and all these discussions are basically taking place from that perspective. So women need to play very important role in securing the health at a larger level. But at the same time, women themselves need lots of health care, right? So we are talking about how women can enhance their own capacities in terms of having better health choices, better health experiences. And so this space should have gender equality. Then violence against women is a very serious kind of constraint problem, legal as well as social, and that should be stopped at every cost, because that creates the narratives and experiences which make people captive basically. So that the torture that people get at physical level is also actually oppressing and subjugating women mentally, right? So the violence is not always only physical, the violence is always physical plus mental. So that needs to be addressed. Then women and armed conflict. Armed conflict basically creates different types of scenario situation where often women become the soft target for retaliation. So that basically needs to be addressed at appropriate level. Then women and economy, that is of course something that we are talking about. And when we were talking about women and poverty, then that is also, the economy is also implied. Then women in power and decision making. Of course, decision making is very important, and the power structure is basically decided by the kind of participation that women are having and the kind of role that women are having in terms of decision making in that system. So that is a very, very important space. Then institutional mechanism for the advancement of women. Yes, of course, institutional mechanisms are required, because when the society is having so many constraints, then without having some kind of institutional mechanism, basically we cannot think of having a systematic gradual advancement of women. Then human rights of women, of course we are having the human rights, and those are equally applicable on men and women, and some of the specific life experiences related to women should also get the protection from the human right agencies. And then media, basically commodification, objectification, all these things of women body is often talked about. So media needs to make a more constructive role when we talk about women and in terms of gender equality. So that is an important space where gender equality is required. And of course the women and the environment, because the worst victim of environmental extremes is always women. The extreme environmental and ecological calamities always adversely affect the women, irrespective of the fact that where women are located, whether that is a rural society or that is an urban society, or what kind of society it is, because they generally take care of good number of things, and any kind of extreme impact of the environment adversely affect the entire worldview related to that. And finally, the girl child, because taking care of the girl child is actually the moral, social, legal responsibility of every state. Because any kind of problem at this stage is actually the reflection of the indicator of the the degree of the level of development of that society. A society which cannot respect its own girl child cannot think of basically being a civil society. So these are the new important concerns which basically are identified under the Beijing conference, and it is understood that if all these social spaces are basically made more democratic, and if the gender equality perspective is developed in the kind of relationship which are existing there, then these will pave the path for empowerment of women. And this empowerment of women basically will help her to take good number of decisions, including the decisions related to their sexuality, their fertility, and their reproductive health. And that will help in basically empowering women from the reproductive rights perspectives. So this is all that we can talk about on this particular topic in this lecture. So in the next lecture, we'll talk about some of the other important issues related to health of the women, like the maternity experiences and other things. So till then, take care. And here is the think about this and activity question. So have a look on this, and then we will meet in the next class. Take care.